It was made out as if what had happened and the fact that 9 of their members had died was entirely their fault. So again, it was blaming the victims for what had happened to them. And that's very much the BBC stance as well towards Palestinians. What happens to the Palestinians is their fault. They bring it's always called retaliation or response. They bring it upon themselves. There's no context given for what's going on in the West Bank, in Gaza. People watching the BBC don't realise how all of this started, and the BBC makes no attempt to explain that. And that way of reporting was transferred over to Death in the Med.
The BBC Trust received 19 appeals against the documentary Death in the Med, raising 51 substantive points for consideration. Its Standards Committee upheld 3, 2 in relation to accuracy and 1 on impartiality. Weeks later, in December 2010, a song was recorded for a late-night hip-hop show to be broadcast on the radio channel BBC One Extra. By the time it was rebroadcast as part of a best-of show on the 30th of April this year, an edit had taken place.
This ain't changing me, I still have the same beliefs. I can scream free Palestine, die for my brats, still pray for peace, still burn a...
They're incredibly angry at this. They're people who are used to seeing bias against Palestine by the BBC, and yet no one's ever seen anything like this, to actually censor a song, censor a word. And the BBC have written back to us and they've said what was being expressed was a political viewpoint and it was controversial, and the BBC has a responsibility to be impartial. So what are they, there's many things they're saying here. They're saying that, as far as they're concerned, you can't express political viewpoints through art, even though art has been used as a medium to express political viewpoints for centuries. And equally, throughout centuries, censors have tried to stop that happening. So is the BBC upholding, the age-old tradition of censors here?
Some music we make for the shelves, but this music, dog, we make for ourselves. And it's for you, from our hearts, so you know we mean it.
British artists have now joined the outcry over what has been called the extraordinary censorship of rapper Mike Righteous. So the question must now be asked: what is the nature of the BBC's relationship with Israel?
The BBC's news output is under phenomenal scrutiny from the Israeli government. I think that people monitor it, certain lobby groups, they monitor every sentence and every word that's uttered. So as a result of that, you've got a huge sensitivity. You've got people, both management, program editors, and the correspondents themselves, constantly thinking, how do I phrase this? What do I say here? Am I being impartial as defined by the BBC? So you tend to find this kind of reporting that everybody's walking on eggshells, which means that the reporting at the end of the day often is influenced by this, because people don't want to offend people. They don't want to cause trouble. People don't want to trigger a flood of complaints. So I think they sometimes err through self-censorship on not criticizing the Israelis and the Israeli government in as fulsome a way as they might otherwise.
In November 2005, the Director General Mark Thompson travelled with his wife to Israel, where he held direct talks with Ariel Sharon. These were, it was reported at the time, intended to build bridges between the BBC and the Israeli government.
Yeah, I mean, he tried to downplay the visit and the timing of the visit, but this came just after the Israelis kicked up a real stink about the documentary on Israel's nuclear weapons. They were furious about that. They started banning BBC journalists from covering stories there, and the visit followed after that. So I mean, really, to say that the timing was coincidence or that there was nothing in it, I just don't buy it.
Thompson's visit to Israel was followed by the controversial reposting of the BBC's Middle East correspondent Orla Guerin just days later. Ariel Sharon had, according to reports, never hidden his intense dislike of Guerin or the BBC's reporting of the Middle East. Suspicions arose that the two events, Thompson's visit to Israel and Guerin's departure, were linked.
My big issue is the disparity in time. That it obviously showed that Ariel Sharon was a bigger priority for Mark Thompson than Mahmoud Abbas. Obviously so, because the way that the BBC has located its bureaus in the region, they're more dependent on Israeli acceptance and accreditation and stuff like that. So, you know, I don't think seeing Ariel Sharon himself was an issue, but if you look at the timing and the events that followed beforehand, and the fact that he just didn't spend as much time with the Palestinians, yeah, it is cause for concern.
As far as I know, his job is to manage and lead the BBC. Obviously that includes world coverage, it includes global coverage, but the idea you build up relations with governments, the point of the BBC reporting is that it is independent, that it is objective, that it is informative. That is what the Charter is about, and that's what has developed the BBC's reputation as being an effective global broadcaster. And I think this is continuously undermined by the way in which the Middle East is reported.
It has been revealed that the BBC Trust has spent £700,000 defending its journalism. One issue is believed to have incurred more legal expense than any other: the BBC's reporting of the Israeli occupation. BBC journalists talk of pressure not to risk annoying the Zionist lobby.
A very intensive debate then developed in the coffee area. And I was with the editor of Newsnight and an editor from the main evening BBC One News. And the Newsnight editor said, it can't be as bad as Greg's saying. And the man from BBC One said, it's worse. He said, and he looked at me and said, you were too easy on them. And he said, and these were the words he spoke to me. He said, we wait in fear for the telephone call from the Israelis.
There is pressure on the BBC from probably Mark Thompson, who seems to me to have an agenda in this respect. There seems to be a great deal of pressure on the BBC from the Israeli government and the Israeli embassy, and they are very assertive towards all journalists and the BBC itself. They challenge every single thing on reporting the whole time. I think there is a bias towards saying that Israel is a democracy in the Middle East. Israel has a right to exist. Israel has its security concerns.
We asked Mark Thompson to explain the BBC's decision not to air the Gaza appeal and to censor the word Palestine from a freestyle performance. We got this email from the BBC press office. All BBC programmes have a responsibility to be impartial when dealing with controversial subjects, and an edit was made to Mike Righteous freestyle to ensure that impartiality was maintained. We did not edit out the word Palestine. Referencing Palestine is fine, but implying that it is not free is the contentious issue. This does not mean the BBC was giving an opinion on the Palestinian issue, simply that it was not appropriate to include the contentious statement in question.
Implying that it is not free. Oh God, all right, okay. That's interesting, because what he is saying is that it is contentious to suggest that Palestine is not free. And that's an extraordinary thing for the BBC to say, because I don't think even the Israelis would claim that they don't have troops in the Palestinian areas. I don't think, I mean, even the Israelis would not, they don't deny that they have occupying forces there. I mean, Sharon actually used the words occupying territories. On the occupation, he used the words. And I don't think, it's extraordinary, because what seems to be happening here is that the BBC have put themselves in a position which is somewhat to the right of the Israelis, actually, haven't they? It's like, it would be like describing the apartheid regime and saying, well, we know that the South Africans call it apartheid, but we're not, because we don't actually, it's contentious to suggest that black people have less power than white people in South Africa or something. You know,
so I must ask the question, why is the BBC continually twisting itself in knots and taking an increasingly illogical stance, one that the Israelis wouldn't even take on this question? Why?
I think they are just intensely nervous of the political pressure, the commercial pressures, and the fact that they are in a situation where almost the whole of the political establishment in this country supports Israel.
I suppose the BBC probably regards its duty as reflecting government policy. And in general, that's what they've done, although they claim to be impartial on controversial questions. I think it has changed over the years and is not what it was set up to be or what people want it to be. Well, I do understand that particularly the policy the BBC has adopted towards Israel, support for Israel, has switched off a lot of public support in the Middle East and the Arab world, the Muslim world. And that's a tragedy because the BBC has had in the past a very high reputation for impartiality and fair reporting, and now I'm afraid, because of their attitude to Israel, it's lost some of that.
Recent controversies, including the broadcast of Death in the Med and the censoring of the word Palestine from a music programme, have affected the BBC's reputation for impartiality. The question for executives here in White City is, do they accept that Zionist pressure is affecting the BBC's coverage of news from Palestine?